All right, everybody. Well, we'll go ahead and get started with tonight's meeting. My name is Sean Mendren. I'm with the City of Sunnyvale. I'm a principal planner in Community Development Department. Tonight's community outreach meeting is for a downtown specific plan amendment, specifically to Block 20. Next slide. And for tonight's agenda, what we will be talking about, I'll do an introduction and give some background information. We'll talk about the next steps as far as what's applicable standards and the applicable design guidelines that would apply to the proposed amendments. And then we'll talk about the two proposals on the block that we have in front of us, or that are being considered as part of the amendment. One project site is 562-568 South Mathilda, which is the Sunnyvale Imaging building and the single family home next door to that. And then we'll have public questions and comments. And then we'll talk about the other project site, which is 510-528 South Mathilda, which is the two project sites located on the corner of Mathilda and West Olive. And then once we go over that proposal, then we'll have public questions and comments again, and then we'll talk about next steps. Next slide. The proposed projects and purpose for today. So the downtown specific plan amendment and rezoning would consider two proposals, as I mentioned, on Block 20. Tonight, we're going to look at sharing the proposed simplified massing studies, just to kind of give you an idea of what's proposed as far as height and proposed unit counts and square footages for commercial. We'll provide context on the city standards and guidelines, and then we'll use your public input today to inform land use development standard updates in the downtown specific plan. For tonight, we would like you to provide input on the project studies, the downtown specific plan amendment considering scale and height of the proposed massing studies, form and massing as far as treatment along the street frontage and along the rear property lines, transitioning to surrounding uses and neighborhoods, and then also the streetscape design along Mathilda and Olive. Next slide. For tonight's meeting, just kind of highlight the controls for the Zoom public input component. If you need any tech support, you can call 916-720-1256. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom meeting, there's a few icons that we'll use as part of the public input component for tonight's meeting. One is the Q&A. Oh, sorry, I'm going the order here on the slide. One is for chat, which is just a direct chat to everybody in the room that's on the Zoom meeting. The next one is raise hand, which will put a little hand icon up, and that will we'll take those in orders as we receive them, and then you can ask your question verbally over the Zoom meeting. And then the last one is Q&A, which will open up a separate window to the project team, and then we can respond directly via text in that window for the meeting. If you happen to call, it doesn't look like we have anybody calling in right now. So if we do get somebody to call in or call in on the phone, I will give them that information as far as how to raise their hand and ask questions. Next slide. The project team here today is, we have City of Sunnyvale staff. Myself, again, I'm Sean Mendren, principal planner and the project contact. We have Cindy Hom, she's a associate planner and also helping out with the Block 20 update. We have the project applicant and the representative for the 562 and 568 Mathilda Avenue site, which is the applicant, Sean Carini. He's the property owner, and then Anthony Ho is the project architect. And then we have Ascent Environmental that's working on the proposed amendments, any changes to design guidelines and streetscape elements as we go through this amendment process. And that team includes Alan Folks, he's the principal presenter. On Tai, she's the urban designer. Matt Gelbin, sorry, Matt, senior planner with Ascent, and then Jamie Kirchner. She's providing the tech support. And just as a informational point, Ascent Environmental also worked on the most recent amendment to the downtown specific plan, so they're pretty familiar with the document. Next slide. For context, sorry. So the block 20, if you can kind of see it down towards the bottom of the slide there, next to the St. Francis Heritage Neighborhood and across from City Hall. It provides an entry into downtown from El Camino. It's approximately about 240 feet from the St. Francis Heritage Neighborhood. Again, it's across from City Hall and adjacent to El Camino, and also near main transit lines on El Camino, and then also the Caltrain station located downtown. Next slide. And again, the project sites that are being studied are the 510 through 528, the South Mathilda, which are the two larger parcels on the corner of Olive and South Mathilda, and then 562 through 568 South Mathilda, which are kind of mid-block, kind of directly across from All American Way. And that's Mr. Karimi's project sites. And they're looking to, excuse me, redevelop, demolish the existing buildings and do new developments. Next slide. And this slide just shows some images of the existing context and what buildings remain on are existing on the site. So for the 510 through 528 are the top two slides on the left. So we have the Manzanetti building, if I got that right, the office building on the corner, and then we have apartments to the right of the office building. And then we have the existing mixed-use building that was constructed probably about 5 or 6 years ago by Silicon Sage. And then we have on the bottom, Mr. Karimi's sites, which is the single-family house with the tile roof, and then his imaging center at 568. And then just going up, you have El Camino with Trader Joe's and the shopping center across the street. Next slide. As far as the project history and how we got to the point where we are today, Mr. Karimi and the former applicant for 510 and 528 submitted a general plan initiation request. That is required and has to go to City Council for approval, which basically just allows an applicant to submit a general plan amendment application. So that was done back in May of 2018. The project was put on hold at the time because we had already started the process for doing the amendment that was adopted last year, and we couldn't change the project description. In addition, we also had COVID happen last year, so that, and this year still, so we that added some additional delay. The project that's on the corner of Olive and South Mathilda, the 510 through 528, that application was actually withdrawn, but the council direction wanted us to look at the entire block 20 as far as changing the land use designation. So that's why we still have the massing studies for that corner parcel. And again, what input we get today will inform the amendment proposals that we'll take forward for consideration. Next slide. And just to kind of highlight what City Council direction was for block 20, again, they wanted us to look at the entire block, not just specific parcels on the block. They wanted us to look at changing the primary land use from high density residential and office to a mixed use designation, to increase the residential units allowed on the block from currently 51 up to 103, with a density of no more than 65 units per acre. And then also to increase the maximum office or commercial area from 16,400 square feet to 36,500 square feet. The council also directed us to keep the building heights currently as indicated in the current downtown specific plan, which is for the office a max of 30 feet and residential a max of 40 feet. Next slide. And as part of the amendment initiation, we'll go through this community outreach process. Once we get kind of a defined project, then we'll work on the additional technical analysis, which will include various studies as part of the environmental review. And then we'll also look at architectural design and detail. And then there's also direction from the council to look at treatment along Mathilda and all of it at the pedestrian level. And again, that's to improve the streetscape design. Next slide. And for existing on block 20, what we currently have is 510 as an office building, about 8,000 square feet. 528 is residential with 8 units. 538, 560 is the mixed-use building that was constructed a few years ago, and that has 15 residential units and about 5,500 square feet of office space. 562 is the existing single-family home, and then 564 through 568 is the current Sunnyvale Imaging Center, and then the other, which is the office space, and then the other 2 parcels are office, which is a bank and a dental office, I believe. So currently we have 24 units on the block and about 2,800 square feet, or sorry, 28,000 square feet of commercial space. And on the image, you can see here where the residential is highlighted in dark orange, pink is commercial, just for point of reference. Next slide. And what the DSP downtown specific plan currently allows for block 20, what we do have is allocations of residential units based on the parcel size and percentage ratio of the block. So 510, we have 18 units that would be allowed. 528 would be 18 units allowed. 538 is already constructed. 562, actually, sorry, I think we have a density that would be allowed on that one. And then 564, 568 is about 3,500 square feet. And then the other 2 parcels at the end of the block would be what's currently existing. And that, sorry, that's a total of 51 units for block 20. And for commercial square footage, it's 16,400 total allowed currently on the block. Next slide. And what's being proposed for these 2 sites is the 510, 528, looking at doing 40 to 46 residential units with ground floor commercial space of about 10,000 square feet. And then 562, 568, which is the Sunnyvale Imaging Center, is about 25 units with about 4,200 square feet of commercial space. So again, the total residential units allowed on the block would be a maximum of 103, and the total commercial square footage on the block would go up to the 36,500. Next slide. And this table just kind of lays out what's allowed versus proposed, just so you can kind of see how this kind of fleshes out here. So again, the 2 corner parcels on Olive and South Mathilda had about 36 units that were currently allowed based on the current downtown specific plan, and what they're proposing is 40 to 46. And commercial square footage is currently at around 8,900 square feet, and they're looking at bumping that up to 10,230 square feet. 538, 560 isn't changing. 562 and 564 South Mathilda currently don't have any residential units allowed, and they would want to do the 25 and then increase the allowed commercial square footage from 3,500 up to 4,240. And then you can see the grand totals down at the bottom of the table here. So we're going from 51 units up to 103, and then existing square or allowed commercial square footage is about 16,400. going up to 36,500. Next slide. And we have multiple development standards and design guidelines that were included in the downtown specific plan that was recently updated and adopted in August of last year. So we have, development standards that deal with height, setbacks. Generally speaking, we have a max lot coverage about 60%. Front setback on Olive would be 10 feet. Interior side setback would be 6 feet. Rear setback would be 20 feet. And again, the maximum building heights would be 30 for the office and 40 for the residential. And then for the design guidelines, we have multiple design guidelines that address how projects fit into the neighborhood. I think as part of this outreach process, we can look at doing some refinements specifically for Block 20 to address the comments that we get from the community. Some of these items include, activation of the street, facade articulation, architectural character, landscaping, streetscape design, and how they deal with parking location design. Next slide. And so this slide just kind of goes over the next steps in the amendment process. So we've done initial review of the amendment request, and that's currently where we are right now. And then we're not there right now. We're on the community meeting, which is being held tonight. And again, this is to gather public input, and then we will work on coming up with a proposed amendment. And then we will prepare the initial draft of the amendment and do the environmental. We'll have a public draft and finalize the environmental, and then go through the public hearing process. That process includes planning commission study session, planning commission review, city council review, and ultimately adoption. And that's anticipated to get wrapped up by the end of the year. Next slide. And so now we'll start with Anthony Ho, and he represents Mr. Karimi, and this is the Sunnyvale Imaging project site.
Hey, Sean, sorry to interrupt you, Anthony. We do have a couple of questions in the chat box that I want to make sure we clarify before we provide some details on 562, 568. It was a couple of questions about the subject of tonight's meeting and clarifying the boundaries. So I'm going to read out a couple comments, and then hopefully Sean, you or Cindy can respond to that. So bear with me for a moment. On one of the early slides, Sean, we got a comment about the orange dotted line includes areas outside the addresses mentioned. Will that area also be included in recommendations that come out of this? And in follow-up, you didn't answer my original question. I had tried to respond. And the council asked to have the entire block review. You are proposing we only discuss 4 properties, but there are at least 2 more south of 568 that you didn't mention. So if changes are being proposed to block 20 as a whole, when do we get to discuss these other 2 properties? Or are no changes being discussed for those 2 properties? So just wanted to clarify before we provide some detail on individual properties.
Sure. So the 2 properties that are located closer to El Camino, those will remain office uses. It's the properties that are to the north of those that we look at changing that to the mixed use designation.
Thank you. So Melinda, I hope that answers your question. We will have additional time for questions and comments later. Anthony, please continue. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Ho, representing the property owner to present this proposed project to you tonight. The proposed project, as you can see within the yellow dash line on the right top corner. So this is where you have a house and the imaging center. The site is only 0.44 acres, 19,000 square feet. What we are proposing to do is to put housing units over commercial. And the first floor will be 4,240 square feet of commercial space. And then on the 2 floors above it will be a total of 25 multifamily units. And the density comes out to be about 56 units an acre. The units will be a mix of studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. The maximum building height is about 46 feet, which is a little over 3 stories. And there'll be about 55 parking spaces, including 14 of them as guest and retail use. And we will see those conceptual floor plans next. Thank you. Next slide, please. So on the left side is the first floor. In pink is the commercial space, about 4,000 square feet. You have the lobby at the center facing South Mathilda. And then to the left, you see a garage entry. So once you enter the garage, you either choose to go down the ramp on the very left side, or you keep going around the retail space and park behind the retail space. On the right side is the basement conceptual plan. So you can see that after you come down the ramp, there are parking spaces there. And these parking spaces, most of them will have mechanical lifts. These are stackers, and in order to increase more parking within a given area, and these stackers are going to be more and more commonly used in many multifamily projects in the years to come. And we are proposing that in order to maximize the parking for the project. Next. On the left side is the second floor concept. You can see that is like a donut shape. The yellow is all the units, and the green is a common courtyard, which is about 20 feet deep by about 70 feet wide. And the space is not big, but you'll see some images later on about how we're going to treat that. The units, again, here you can see that studios is about 400 square feet, 1 bedroom about 600, 2 bedroom is 900 to 1,000 square feet. And it might have a penthouse, like one of the more luxurious unit, maybe in the lower right corner, facing Mathilda, in that corner there. And later on, you'll see some massing study about how that would feel like from the street level, how it looks like. On the right side is the third floor. Again, this donut-shaped building will continue, and the units will have a view down to the courtyard below. And so it's only 3 floors tall. And the lower right corner where you see the 2 bedroom there, that's where the unit will get a little bit taller to get a partial 4th floor. And we intentionally put the taller unit at this corner so that it is away from other residential properties. And you can see later on that this articulation in the height, in fact, would give a better streetscape, in addition to getting a little more living space for that unit. Next. On the left side is a roof plan. You can see that the penthouse unit, the partial 4th floor, is right there at the lower right corner. And then you get rooftop terraces, so-called rooftop gardens in the green area. And at the back, where you see the grayish area, is solar panels and mechanical units. We're probably going to use quite a bit of solar panels for this building. On the right side, you see is a section cut of the building. So Mathilda is on the left, so you're cutting through the building here, and you can see that the front facing Mathilda is a little bit taller, but it steps down towards the back and becomes a 3-story only at the back side. And here you see that at the bottom, you can see the garage, you know, in the section cuts. Down at the very bottom of this page is a study of a sight line study. So on the very left is Mathilda, and you see our building there. And we cut all the way out to Murphy Avenue. And so we are trying to put a person at the backyard of a house along Murphy and see how that person will, whether that person can see this building or not. As you can see in this thin red line there, the person, if you try to look at this building, you can't really see it because it's being blocked by other houses and apartment buildings and what, you know, all these buildings in between. So you can't really see this proposed building much. Next. This is a view that we do like a simulation to test what if we put a new building on this site. And this view is taken from the south, looking towards the north. So this is existing. And next slide is what if this building were to be built. As you can see, the very right in front of us is where the building gets taller, 4 stories, but it's only partial, and it drops down to 3 stories along the back, which is the same height as the building in the farther away, you know, the building that is already constructed, the orangey building, same height as that. Next. This is a view taken from the north side, looking towards the south in the opposite direction. Again, you see the house and the imaging center there. And next, this is what it looks like. And as I just said, the building height will be matching the already built condo building next door. And you can see here that with a height articulation of the entry tower right in the middle, and then the penthouse unit on the partial 4th floor can give the building a little more roofline articulation, which adds visual interest. Next. So we did some study about how to treat the common area, the decks, and also the exterior. So at the top row are 4 images. That is how we might treat the garden, you know, right at the center of that donuts. And these images have about the same scale as the courtyard that we have. And you can see that is more like a little private, or we should say quiet space with smaller plants, so that it gives you an area to stop, maybe meditate, and have some quiet moments. And on the top right there, you can see that some units will look out into the courtyard. At the bottom, we're showing you some initial concept of what the building might be like. It won't be exactly like this, of course, because we're just contemplating right now, but it's going to be a little more contemporary design with traditional forms so that it kind of blends itself into the greater Sunnyvale area But again, we don't want to be too contemporary or too modern because there are homes behind us that is still at a very traditional architecture. So it's going to be a blend between contemporary and traditional. And I believe that wraps up my presentation, and I'll let city staff talk about how this project will comply with the development standards of Block 20. Thank you.
All right, next slide. All right. So this slide just kind of highlights where there's either inconsistencies or where the amendment would address that potential inconsistency with the current code. So again, they're looking at changing it from high density residential to mixed use, which sorry. So yes, so they would, it's currently not consistent with the high density residential designation, and changing it to mixed use would address that. The lot coverage most likely would be over the 60%. So that would be potentially addressed in the amendment or through the special development permit process for later when the formal project actually comes in. The minimum front setback on Mathilda, it's consistent with that. Interior and rear setback would be consistent with those at 6 feet and 20 feet. And then the maximum building height, excuse me, would not be consistent. So they would have to do a change in propose an amendment to the specific plan to address that height change. Sorry, excuse me. Next slide.
Okay, so now I believe we want to hear from those of you that would like to speak, and you'll see that the slide's got a little 2-minute countdown on it once you start talking. So if you can keep your comments to 2 minutes, that would be appreciated. And focus in, if you would, on the presentation here that was just given for the 560, 562. That part of the block. We will, after this is over, then give you a little bit of a preview of what was discussed before relative to the project on the north end of the block. So if that makes sense, if we can do that over the next 15 minutes, then we'll show you what was proposed on the north end. So I see several raised hands, and we go to Sonal Gupta.
Yeah, hi. I live on Tape Street. I have 2 comments. Well, 1 question and 2 comments. The first question is, like, if we move it from high residential to mixed use, what impact can it have on any future height increases? Does that have any kind of state legislature or city legislature having an impact? And the second point I wanted to make was, there were a couple of times in the presentation from the architect where the statements seemed a bit untrue based on the information based on the slides. So I want to point those out. The first one was that when you look from Murphy, you won't be really able to see the building. But as you can see on that slide, you could actually see the building. So I don't see why the architect made the comment that you cannot see the building from Murphy. The second point was when we were discussing the building next to the existing mixed-use building, the architect said that it's a similar height, but it's clearly not. That's why they're there. And I personally don't like this part in which we are increasing the height for this one. If we do, then it's going to be like much bigger than the next building, and would look off. And I don't see like why we need to have such a big penthouse on the top, honestly. So for me, it would be a no. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sunil. Okay, Apurva?
Hi, I'm Apurva. I live on Dave Street as well. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. So I'm Apurva. I live on Dave Street as well. I had a few comments as well as some questions. So like Sonal mentioned that the height thing that was shown, it was incorrect because even if you can just barely see the back of the building, the front of the building is actually taller. So that means that you would be able.
Apurva, you're muted.
Ask
Now you're back.
it for. Sorry. Yeah. I was saying the city council has asked for the entire block to go from 51 to 103. However, in the current proposal, it seems that we are excluding the other top front two properties from being consideration. So we are basically saying that all the existing increase in housing just goes to these two properties, which then means that later on, when if the front two properties start developing, it would just be they won't have any available. So there would be another amendment. And then we would just basically are giving these two properties a non-uniform priority. So that's another feel I feel is that the current structure that it is a really beautiful architecture in which you enter from South Sunnyvale, and living in South Sunnyvale, I observed this. You enter the downtown area and the height slowly increases, which really makes you kind of transition onto a nice downtown with like multiple big office buildings and now the AMC and Whole Foods. So that feel is especially lost if we just start putting big buildings right at the start. So those were the few things I wanted to mention, apart from the comments, like we are increasing all this area and it seems like currently all of that area is being allocated to only 2 properties instead of the total 4 properties that are there. So which would just lead to more later on. And as a final comment from my point of view, it is surprising to me that the height is being increased because in this current scenario, just building a 1-story building would be a great return. So for us to kind of just increase the height just to get that penthouse in and just stand in our backyard and just look at monstrous buildings is not really what Sunnyvale, the town, is about. And the final thing I would say is across from the city hall, the new design is so nice. We really want it to be the primary focus of that block rather than just looking at yet another residential building that just looks routine. So that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you. I mean, so 2 people have commented here on the height and the total number of allocated units going from 53 or 51 to 103. Sean, anything you want to say about the numbers on the allocations there for clarification?
Sure. So I think the council had established the maximum of 103. That doesn't necessarily mean we have to go up to that full amount. I think that's why we're going through the public input process. So we'll take everybody's comments and present that information to Planning Commission and City Council, and also use it to develop an amendment to the specific plan. So I think if the unit density or height is an issue, those are all things that we would definitely take note of.
Okay, thank you, Sean.
Sure.
All right, Melinda, I see your hand is raised.
I'm unmuted. Hi, I wanted to echo my fellow TAFE Streeters comments about the height. That's a concern for me because I've been around the block enough with these kind of projects. I know that once it starts to creep up, it starts to creep up in other places too. And council did, when they asked you guys to look at this, did say they wanted to keep the residential housing at 40 feet. I'm also a little wondering whether we really, housing is such a huge issue. I'm wondering whether we really need the retail as much, considering we're putting in a bunch of retail just 2 blocks away, but you guys will know better than me. My other question though is this project an active, like, is there someone actually planning to come and build this project? Is there a developer who's going to build it? And if so, who is that developer? Is the current owner going to be building it? Or is somebody else going to be building it? Because it seems to me I would like to make sure that if we are making changes to this plan, this is what's going to be built. That there's not going to be somebody else coming in later and asking for additional changes down the road.
Okay, thank you, Melinda. Anthony, do you want to answer that question?
Yes, Ms. Hamilton. So the project right now, the land is owned by Dr. Karimi, who is on the panel, and he intends to develop that himself, and he might even, live in that building too. And regarding the retail space, I'll defer that to city staff to answer whether is it a must that we have to have a mixed use or not. Definitely the retail space does take up some parking spaces, and it kind of take away the space for more housing units. But I wonder whether it has to be a mixed use. And so I would defer that to city staff to answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Sean?
Sure. So the proposal that's on Olive and Mathilda, they actually wanted to have the commercial designation or commercial square footage increase because they wanted to do their office on the ground floor. It wasn't necessarily going to be retail. And then I think, for Mr. Karimi's side, it's for his business. It's not necessarily required that they do the commercial on the ground floor. I think from a planning standpoint, Mathilda is a very busy street. It's, I think, a little bit challenging to have residential units on the ground floor on Mathilda unless they're set back quite a bit. And then we also wanted to keep the space active along Mathilda and Olive. So that's partially why we were looking at increasing the commercial square footage, but it's not necessarily going to be required. I think it'll be up to project proponent when they come forward.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Bill Weaver?
Hi there.
Hi, Bill.
Yeah, I'm also on Tafe Street, and it's funny, we've been through this before. While I can deal with the mixed use perspective and the housing and all that, the part that does kind of get to me is the height. Again, okay. We're just increasing the height a bit, but as with most such projects, once you increase, you give a waiver for that, it may not be built the way it's currently proposed. And the height is a really big sticking point for me, partially because I have that 3-story building they were talking about in my backyard. And I can tell exactly what time it is by when the solar panels go offline because that building shades out my house. So I would really not like to put a waiver for any kind of construction which would increase the height above the current standard. Because that's why we had the downtown specific plan in the first place, to be consistent. And as Apura mentioned, it is kind of nice to build up slowly and not suddenly have this jarring increase of 4 stories there. And to say, oh, it's only a little bit of a penthouse, it's still frigging 4 stories. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Comments noted. All right, Debbie Hill.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sometimes these Zoom meetings and my controls don't always work together.
I know how you feel about that. Go ahead.
I come from a commercial property owner and a condominium project in town, and I kind of wanted to get involved in what's going on in the rest of the town, just because, or city, just because I feel like I haven't paid much attention to it. I think Mathilda could use some additional elements along it and create some articulation. So this project, I hear what the owners are discussing as far as the height of going from 40 to 46 feet. That doesn't bother me as much, but and the commercial use on the first floor, I agree with the city as far as keeping some street presence down there. The most concern that I would probably have is making sure, because you've got existing neighborhoods around you, that you're being respectful and pay attention to the parking, because that always, seems, it's very hurtful when all of a sudden the parking comes in and it's not, they start going out into the neighborhood and, disturbing the neighbors with all the parking. So I think by providing those lift systems, although I'm not crazy about them, but they do provide extra parking that will support the project and keep everybody out of the neighborhood. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Debbie. I see one more hand raised. Paul King. Paul, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Just a simple question. Oh, that shouldn't be my Zoom profile, but a simple question. The outline of the building, where was the 46 feet? It seemed like there's a low section on the left, a higher section on the far right, but in the middle there was like the stairwell or something that went above the penthouse. Is that where the 46 feet is?
Anthony, do you want to weigh in there?
Yes. What I understand, which I'll let planning staff to confirm that, is that the stair tower there in the middle section that you mentioned about, there's an overrun, like what do you call that? The elevator overrun, because of the mechanical equipment, and also you need a stair that goes up to the rooftop. So there is an extra. I think the city allows the overrun of elevator to be a little more than what the building height is, and I'll let them speak about that. And but you're absolutely correct. If you look at the building from Mathilda, about half of it is 3-story, similar to the Silicon Sage building next door. And then right at the center is the stair tower. And to the right side of the stair tower is the penthouse. You are correct in that. So I'll let staff talk about the overrun and what they allow. Thank you.
Sure. So yes, the code does have some allowances for mechanical equipment and elevator overruns. I believe it's about 10% of the roof area, up to, I believe it's 12 feet. So we do have some allowances for that in the code.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Paul, I assume that answered your question?
Yeah, I think to a large degree. The last thing is just a comment then is, are the apartments that are directly behind these buildings, are those people ever show up at these meetings? Have you ever reached out to them?
Yes, we sent the mailed notices out to property owners and tenants. Sometimes tenants show up, sometimes they don't. It's really hard to kind of gauge when they actually will come to these meetings. But we'll continue to notice them as we go through the process for any kind of other public outreach meetings that we have.
Sean, you did notice within 2,000 feet of the block, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, did we get to everybody's chat questions there? Melinda, did you get your follow-up? You had a follow-up question, did that get taken care of?
Yes, yes, it did. I'm chatting with Sean on the side.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
All right. We'll take one or two more questions here from everyone, and then I'll give you a presentation of what the previous application was for 510, 528. Okay, Apruva, or you have your hand raised? Or was it Sunil?
Yes, me. Actually, I didn't get the answer to my question, which was, if we move this to mixed use, what's the impact on future development of this building later on? Like, does it have any impact on any future height increases that it can have? Because that would also, have an impact on my feedback on it. I would generally I like to have coffee shops and stuff at the bottom, so I would be supportive of making it mixed use, but only if it doesn't have an impact on height.
Well, you can have a mixed use building that has commercial uses on the first floor and residential above, and you can have a straight residential building, but so the height limit is not necessarily tied to its land use designation as per se. But a lot of the developers, when they're doing these smaller urban infill projects on busy streets like this, will try and do commercial, retail, and other kinds of spaces on that ground floor, because it raises the residential above a little bit and gives the residential a little bit more privacy. But that's...
Got it. I see. Got it. Well, I'm still don't like the proposal because of the height increase. So that would be my feedback. Thanks for the answer.
Okay, thank you, Sunil. All right. If we can move on to this next grouping of slides now, then I'll do that, and then we can get back to some more questions again. So if we can go to the next slide. All right, on the 510, 528 project, that's at the corner of West Olive and Mathilda. That's about 0.72 acres. What was being proposed previously, and what we're about to show you, was basically apartments over commercial and retail space. They did 3 different options, all of them up to 60 feet and 5 stories. So based on previous comments we just heard here, I'm sure you all have something to say about that, but we'll show you what that looked like. They were proposing 10,200 square feet of ground floor retail commercial space, 40 to 46 units, depending on whatever option they were looking at, which fit within the 65 dwelling units per acre maximum. And the application that was drawn was also proposing some affordable housing elements, units, which did qualify for some state density bonus there. So let me show you what that looked like. If we go to the next slide, they did some conceptual floor plans which showed sort of a kind of a setback a little bit at the corner there at Olive and Mathilda with some retail. Behind that is the parking garage and a parking ramp. Very much like the other project, you can't park at all sort of the required number of spaces behind this retail, so you need to go down a level. So they have a basement level of parking. And then this kind of community retail and space there that was also probably could be allocated to the residential above, having an address out on Mathilda. A typical floor, very similar to the other project in that you would have kind of this donut shape. And the reason why they're looking at these kinds of spaces again is the depth of the parcel on block 20 is fairly narrow in that it's only about 130 feet or so. If you look at the block that is up across the street, catty corner to this, that has the 4 stories of apartments, and then it steps down to the townhouses. There's an additional 100 feet in that depth that allows them to do that step down. It's a little bit tougher here, but I'm not justifying anything. I'm just saying this is what the architects and the developers looking at as they're trying to get these projects to fit on this long linear block. So that's an example floor. There was about 15 units. There was different kinds of bedroom sizes from 1s to 3s. And then at the very top, the applicant at that time was proposing a penthouse apartment. And the unit size is anywhere from 650 square feet up to 1,200. Okay, next slide. And so option 1 here was, again, 5 stories, 46 units total. And it's set back at the 4th level 6 feet, and then went up for that final 5th story. The pink color on the bottom represents generally that commercial retail space. And so you had basically 4 floors of apartments above that. And there's the same sort of section. And obviously, if you're in those units that sit right behind these buildings, yes, you're going to see that height. And even if you screen it at the property line, which somebody obviously would do that, you're still going to be able to see these buildings. The further away you get, obviously, the less of an impact it's going to be. But you get an idea here of the scale of what they were looking at. The next slide shows an option 2. If you go to that, this one kept that setback, but then took off a layer of some of the units, 3. So it went from 43 units to 40 units, 46 to 40, and stepped down in the back, and then was proposing like a rooftop garden on that back piece there where it says 50 feet, and then there's still the 60 feet ultimately out on the Mathilda frontage. You go to the next slide, you'll see option number 3. This one was 43, so it was somewhere in the middle between 40 and 46. Still had the 5 stories on Mathilda, and then kept the step down to 4 stories on the backside facing the alley. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So here you can see the 3 different options, kind of comparing them and how they kind of sit relative to each other. Sometimes we put them all in the same slide so you can see what they look like. Okay, next. And then this is kind of a typical section of what that building would look like. You'd see about a 15-foot zone from the bike lane and the curb to the front of the building. Fairly consistent with the building that sits just south of this one. The retail commercial space at the ground floor, apartments going up with the 6-foot setback. The piece in the middle is allowing light to get down into the center of the building, and then the units on the back with the parking on one level, and then the dotted line there would indicate there'd be parking below and a below garage setup. Okay, next. So this is a massing concept, very similar ghosting in of what Anthony showed you on the other project. Just again, to give everyone a sort of sense of what that means to have 4 stories stepping back to a 5th story on the top. Now, obviously, this is not a proposal because that application was withdrawn, but we think it was very good, at least to show you all, to get an understanding of what the height and scale of this might be in the context of an existing building, which is to the right. Let's look at the next slide. There it is, you're looking south at the corner. That's Olive coming across the intersection there. And you can see that kind of centerpiece, which would be potentially set back a little bit at the corner to give a little bit more corner space on the sidewalk. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see what it looks like from the alley behind the building. Sort of the scale and the massing of how it might stand up. Again, this is all conceptual because there is no application at this point in time. Okay, next. And then some similar kind of imagery about the rooftop deck spaces or the courtyard spaces on the bottom, and then a little bit of that articulation of the building massing and how that might work on the top 2 slides with different articulations of entries, window recesses, different ways to handle the eaves and the overhangs and so forth. But whatever buildings do ultimately get constructed on this site, they would have to follow a lot of the guidelines that are in the downtown specific plan, which is mandating a lot of the articulations that you see coming through in these photographs, whatever height they may be. Okay, next. So very similar, that this project would go to a mixed use. So that would have to change. The lot coverage obviously has to go above 60% on these kinds of sites to make them work. And that's very consistent with kind of that mixed use development standard, that it's going to be set by the site plan as it comes in, but it, generally speaking, will be larger than 60%. The other things generally work fine in terms of meeting what the code says now, and particularly that rear setback of 20 feet. But the building height here again is one that would be in question. Let's go to the next slide. And so, knowing that this was going to come up, we put in this slide because you can start to see here the height ranges on the various blocks that come in around block 20. So to the north, you have a 50-foot height limit on Mathilda. And when I mentioned before about that project that stepped down to the townhouse on the back, that's block 14. And you can see the depth there that's much wider than block 20. But that's how they did that. And it's a very, I think everybody in town generally agrees that's a nice looking project as it steps down. Around block 20, the residential projects that are just to the east, that height limit is actually 55 feet, even though those are only 2-story buildings, because it's in an R4 zone. Interesting, but we thought we'd point that out anyway, just as a contextual matter. So the 40 feet is covering this to the north, and as we talked about before, it was 30 feet on the southern end of the block. If you meet the 4 stories, generally speaking, that's in this case 1 level of commercial retail that's generally speaking between 15 and 20 feet high in order to get the right heights for a retail space. Then if you add in the 3 floors of residential over that, then you're probably generally looking at a 50-foot building in order to make that all work and work comfortably, both for the spaces in between and how that articulates along the block. 4 stories of residential over retail obviously pushes that higher. That's why you saw those guys designing something that was up to 60 feet. So as we discuss this, I think you can now start to at least understand that you're gonna probably get you can stay within the 65 dwelling units per acre within those three floors, doing apartments that like what was suggested here. So hopefully that gives you at least the context. And now you can discuss sort of where you want to fall on the height. But I think that what was done before was probably illustrative of at least framing that context for everyone. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And now we can start to take questions again. So similar thing, we have the Q&A and the raise hand. So you can continue to do both. So let's get to the raise hands. All right, so starting to see them come in. Melinda, I believe, is first up.
I was asked to unmute, so I guess so. I think my question's kind of been answered, but I just want to point out for everybody that this project is actually in receivership and bankruptcy. And I feel like when I was there in 2018 and I argued against the height back then, and the thing nobody wants to talk about is council actually prints money for developers when we entitle things. Well, I'm not on a council anymore, but when the council gives entitlements, they're basically printing money for developers. And I really feel strongly that without an active project, there's not much point in making massive changes, certainly not to 60 feet on this, because it basically just increases the value for a company that's in bankruptcy. And there's nothing to say that whoever buys it wouldn't come back and, ask for even more changes to the entitlements. So I appreciate you guys are bringing us the last active project on this site, but I really hopefully and fervently believe that project was shot down 3 years ago for a reason, and it should not be used as the basis of discussion for this, and that 40 feet is plenty high for residential, yeah. Silicon Sage's building next to it might also be on the chopping block as well. So I just think that we should not make nearly as many changes or consider nearly as many changes to this property because of the fact that we don't know who's going to buy it. We don't know what they're going to want to do with it. And I'm very uncomfortable basically giving a freebie to a potential future developer when we really don't have any idea what anybody would do with that space.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Melinda. All right, next hand is Apurva. Apurva, am I saying that right? Apurva? Apurva, are you there? Okay.
Oh, can you hear me now? Sorry.
Oh, there you go.
Zoom was a bit off. So yeah, I would like to echo whatever Melinda said. It was a major thing for us to really figure out that this thing is not going to be used. I would again reiterate my previous point that if 101 is the maximum block across maximum housing across the block, then we should really be just looking at uniformly distributing them or distributing them in terms of existing height, because it really does make a lot of difference when you enter an environment with different, a gradient transition rather than a direct transition. And one more comment I had was this is the first community outreach meeting I'm attending, and there was a significant amount of information provided, which was not in the letter that we received, nor was it online. And it was very difficult to find these meetings in the calendar as well. So for us to give input, we really need to know what is happening before we could actually give input. So the letter that said that the height is not being increased, that's clearly not the case, because the proposal is to increase the height, even though the council asked you guys to keep the height the same. So it is a bit disconcerting to me that these things are not available for us to comment. I asked this question, but I got a response that I would be able to respond in the the planning commission meeting. But I feel that then the whole point of community outreach is lost, because I can always go to the planning commission meeting, but then by that time the project is in a much more advanced state. And if we want to really get the community input, maybe we should give the community the information needed to make sound input and make sound decisions and make sound suggestions. That's it.
Okay, Apurva, thank you. All right, next person, Sonal.
Hi, this is Sonal. I live on the Tafe Street. So I want to discuss my concerns that we had raised in 2018 meeting on the same exact topic. The thing is that if we allow increasing height for these two projects, the apartments behind it would obviously feel the effect of it, and they would want to probably increase their height too, which directly affects us who live on Tape Street. And my house looks at these apartments like it's in my backyard. And unfortunately, I don't know when that decision happened, in which that small section is R4 with 55 feet height, which shouldn't have been done in the first place, because there's a very big height increase from going from first one floor houses that are on Tape Street. We can't really rebuild these single story houses into 3-story houses, because these are really old houses, unless we just like tear it out and then build it from scratch, which obviously we don't want to do because it's heritage district and we want to maintain the heritage. So if we are not able to increase the height of our single family homes, and next door all these buildings are increasing their heights, this directly impacts us and the sun that we get in our backyard. So I would strongly recommend against increasing the height on these two projects. Thank you.
Okay, comment noted. Thank you, Sonal. Bill Weaver?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, Bill, we hear you.
Okay, as you can imagine, I'm going back the same route that everybody else has. Changing the plan for any project, much less one that really isn't a project yet, is unwise. And we did that downtown plan with the stepped up height for a purpose. To suddenly go 20, 30, 60 is ridiculous. Also, I put in a question here about elevator overrun, and it says Sean would like to answer this question live. So,
Hey.
Yes.
Hey, Bill.
Hi.
Actually, I was going to ask Anthony to clarify on the overrun. I think you're right that it probably would be a hydraulic elevator, but maybe Anthony could answer that question.
Yeah, at this time, we haven't really gone that deep into the construction of it yet. It might be hydraulic. In fact, what we expressed there in the images, the ghost images of the building, is really, just a suggestion at this time. Honestly, we would like to work with the neighbors and with the city planners to, get a solution of the building, whether it's form or the height or architecture, to be at a point that everybody will feel more comfortable. So we don't mind if we lower that tower height, if we can, technically do it. We are very open to that, honestly. So that's what I can suggest at this time. Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Anthony. Bill, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just concerned that they were looking at the elevator overrun as an excuse to build a corner on the tower at extra 12 feet. We got it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Debbie?
Hi there. I was just in shock when you were showing that one slide about what was going on in El Camino. And I know it wraps around the corner. Were those 72 feet or 75 feet and then 30 feet for the existing neighborhood? And then maybe the council can take into consideration that the 2 lots that we're discussing be designed similarly, where whether it's going to be a 40 foot down to a 30 foot and then 30 foot and then up to a 40 foot on the corner. Maybe they can, there can be some creative planning verbiage or something into the approval process that they can mimic each other as it goes down the street, continues on down Mathilda.
All right, good thought. If we, Jamie, if you could go back to that, we can just, that's slide, I think it's 2 previous. Yeah, right there.
Yeah, that pink was just like, I was in shock. I thought, well, and I know it's along El Camino, but again, it's backing up to those existing neighborhoods. And That's a lot. And then and for some reason it stops when it gets down to the next block. I grew up in Santa Clara, and that was always Taffy to me, but I hear everybody calling it Taff.
Yeah, Taff.
But yeah.
Or Cindy, did anybody want to provide clarification on that 75-foot?
I believe that 75-foot designation has been there for a while. I would have to double check and see how long ago that was established. I don't recall off the top of my head. But yeah, that's been in place for a while.
Okay. Any other questions, Debbie?
No, that was it. I just, like I said, I was trying to get more involved in what's going on around me. And I was just surprised when you brought the slide up to see the designation of 75 and then drops down to 30 right there, and the rationale behind it. But if it's been there for a while, the rationale might not be on this call.
Correct. So the decisions have been made.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
I don't need to hash it out.
All right. Is there anybody else that would like to raise their hand? Has everybody gotten their answers from the chat? Any follow-up required? Melinda?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to, you mentioned, I saw earlier somewhere that the slides were going to be available, and I'm just wondering if we want to keep following this, what are the next steps and where would we look for notifications and stuff for the next meetings?
Funny you should ask that. Just about to tell you that. But before we do, I just want to make sure that we get anybody on the list here, any of the attendees who have a final or first question they want to ask. Anybody before Sean does next steps? Okay, seeing none. Sean, you're up.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for participating. So the next steps, again, we'll be taking the input that we received at this meeting and then kind of working through the matching studies that have been provided, identifying the issues that that have been raised tonight, and kind of going through the current downtown specific plan and looking at ways to address those issues. Once we have done that, then we'll have a draft document that we'll have available for people to look at. Then we can finalize it, and then it'll go through the public hearing process, which would include a planning commission study session, and then it would go to planning commission and city council for final decision. We probably will squeeze another community meeting in once we have a draft amendment together. And again, we're looking at trying to get this through by the end of the year. And again, my contact information is here on the slide. We will have information up on the downtown specific plan amendment webpage. The link is noted down here on the bottom of the slide, and we can go ahead and send out that link to everybody who's participated in the Zoom meeting today. It's currently getting updated, so hopefully everything will be on there by tomorrow. But again, we'll post a PowerPoint presentation, have all my contact information, and feel free to send me any comments or any other additional concerns or thoughts that you may have on the proposed changes or the proposed information that you've seen tonight. Anything else, Alan?
No, not for me. I think we've got it all here, and everybody had some very good comments, and I think we can move ahead trying to examine these the parcels and the block now in a little more detail.
It looks like we got one more question in the chat. about, I think, saving the house on Mr. Karimi's site, the greenhouse, or looking at relocating it. If Mr. Karimi has any response, or Anthony, to that question.
This is Sean Karimi. When it comes to that point, I will list it if somebody wants to take it away.
Okay. Any
Okay.
other? I think that's it.
I think that's it, Sean.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks again for participating. And I look forward to hearing from you guys as we kind of go through this process. And again, feel free to email me with any other comments or concerns.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.